Okay, hello everyone. We are excited to be here with you all today and really talk about how COVID shifted Salesforce's strategy research during this time. So to start, I know we did kind of quick introductions, but kind of real faces to real names. I'm Jessica Kremer, Director on the Global Communications team at Salesforce.
And I'm Conor, Donegan, Senior Manager on the Global Comms team, specifically with the research group. We are very excited to talk to you today. Quick rundown of our agenda here. We'll give you a little bit of background of the program that we run here at Salesforce in general, a little bit of a history. Then we'll talk about a couple of ways that, like everything else, the pandemic really shifted the way that we conduct research at Salesforce and the way that we bring it to market. We'll talk about some key takeaways that we had, and then hopefully have some time for a couple of questions from folks that might be on your minds. Before I dive into all that, I want to kind of take a step back and answer a question I think a lot of people probably have right here, which is, who is Salesforce? What is Salesforce anyway? At the highest level, Salesforce is the world's #1 customer relationship management platform as defined by IDC, the International Data Corporation. That means that we provide a platform that marketers, salespeople, customer service professionals, e-commerce professionals, and many more can use to really organize information about their customers to help them understand what they expect, what they need, and their behavior, and provide the personalized engagement that they need to ultimately win new customers and keep existing ones. In addition to what we do by bringing companies and customers together, I do want to highlight something that's really important to us as a company, which is our core values. Trust from our customers that we will safeguard their information and have their best interests in mind. The success of those customers, which we are not successful without. Innovation with the 3 releases that we have every year with the latest technology, as well as equality for all of our stakeholders. And I mention those because they are so core to what we do as a company as a whole, but in particular what we have in communications and the research. And Jess in particular will walk through how those played into her project. So let me just take a step back and say, why do we have a research program that we've invested so much in Salesforce Comms in the first place? And it goes back several years ago, before the program existed, where we realized, there was this disconnect between, what we were saying as a company in terms of articulating how we saw the future, how we saw the development of technology and society in general. So you see on the left there, our CEO and co-founder, Mark Benioff, at our Dreamforce conference a few years back, talking about the 4th Industrial Revolution, the rise of artificial intelligence and robotics, and how they were going to impact the way that we did business, that we engage with companies, that we lived in general. And it was hard for many of us in customer-facing positions to articulate how that really connected to our products on the right, so our Customer 360 platform. And so we realized that research could help us bridge that gap by illustrating the trends in real numbers that people could understand, how these developments were playing out, the challenges and the priorities that they were bringing on to businesses, and ultimately earning trust and capability both from a communication standpoint, a sales standpoint, and a marketing standpoint. So our core program, which I'll go into in just a little bit, really focuses on particular lines of business. 3 examples you see there: sales, service, and marketing. And if we go to the next slide, you can see a little bit of the breadth of what we've put together over the years. First being that data program, again, deep line of business insights that underpin long-term messaging. Our Snapshot program that we piloted this summer, thanks to the challenges that we had with COVID, that helps us get kind of quick turnaround insights that we were able to bring to market much faster. And the scaling of that to a new model, Jess's Global Stakeholder series. So the state of program, just to give you sort of a concept of the role that these play, they're very long-term plays. Up front, we do a lot of vetting of the messaging and the key priorities that we have as a certain line of business, be it sales, service, or marketing, IT, or whichever one else there might be, looking at a variety of factors up front. Mediagenic topics, what does the media care about in this space that we want to make sure we're capturing so that we do ultimately gain citations and mentions. Market trends, what are the analysts finding that follow the space? What are our customers themselves telling us in the focus groups that another research group in our team, in our company does? How those map to product capabilities and the roadmap that we have? And I want to emphasize, we actually never mention product explicitly in this content, but we do want to have that dotted line, obviously, to what we can offer as solutions as salespeople, public relations professionals, and others move the conversations along that these pieces of research can instigate. Our corporate messages, like those values that I went over before, and finally, a global perspective. We, over the years, have grown tremendously, especially in particular from a geographic standpoint, on 6 continents and many markets, both primary and secondary. So we want to make sure we're providing things that are relevant there. So all that upfront work, as you can imagine, goes through a lot of vetting from a lot of different voices, a lot of iterations to really develop that messaging. And only then are we doing in-depth persona-based research, mostly quantitative, sometimes a little bit of qualitative thrown in as well. But for this example that you see on the screen here, state of marketing, we're looking at director plus decision makers across different industries, making sure we have the right sample there, that we can break that out across different geos. For some projects, different roles within departments and lines of business. So that takes quite a bit of time to collect that data if it's so specific. And then we develop this really in-depth core pillar asset, a report that can be in length approaching sometimes up to 100 pages of data. And then we have an active media launch, big moment that we have here in our comms group. But that from end to end, that process takes, depending on the project, 3 to 5 months. And we have this very long-term activation from multiple fronts to fuel like long-term campaigns and it being incorporated in different types of content from different groups. So these are great. These have tremendous performance. They really are truly some of the highest performing assets that we as Salesforce produce. But this model does not work very well in a landscape in which things are evolving extraordinarily rapidly. People are really just looking for answers to what's going on in the first place. And we, frankly, as a company, didn't really have a narrative that we were quite focused on to deliver out. So what we did, as we go to the next slide, is transform this playbook by scaling it down and really rethinking the way that we might do this research for this instance, right? So ultimately, we scaled down the 3 to 5 month planning process to roughly 2 weeks, and actually including turning around those insights that we collected into deliverables. So taking down, the intake process, right, rather than going through multiple rounds of, what is the message that we need to bring out, we realized we really needed to really find out what the answers were in the first place, and bring those directly to our audiences. So looking at the mediagenic topics, of course, understanding what were the questions that were being asked in the media, again, those market trends that the personas were looking at, and that dotted line to our product capabilities. We did have the global perspective, but we focused on core markets versus all the secondary markets that sometimes we would include, which can be in the dozens. And then instead of looking at the really specific, hard to find audiences or excuse me, survey panels, we looked at the broad general population to understand sort of the flip side, not what sort of the supply side, if you will, of the equation was looking at, but what the demand side, their customers were experiencing and looking for. And then instead of packaging that up in a really cohesive, single big deliverable from which there was lots of derivative content, we focused on, from the get-go, snackable content that I will go through on the next slide in just a lot more detail. And then finally, this was not going to be a one and done effort. Things were evolving so rapidly in ways that were not expected, that there were just so many questions. The data that we might publish in 1 week could be completely irrelevant or out of date 2 weeks later. So we knew that we needed to repeat this over a period of time. So what we came up with was our Consumer and Workforce Snapshot series, a bi-weekly tracking study of about 3,500 individuals in key global markets across North America, Europe, APAC, and Latin America, to help us really understand what they were experiencing, what their behaviors, how their behaviors were changing across a bunch of different topics, and providing that information directly to our audiences versus going through a stringent narrative that we wanted to really bake out. So we focused on the topics that you see here that we selected as being priorities for our company. And each wave, we had a total of 8 waves, would include trending questions on each of these topics, right? So that we could show a progression of how things were evolving over the weeks, excuse me. And then in each wave, we did a deep dive on one of these given topics. So for 1 week, for example, we would ask, in addition to the customer service questions that we were repeating each week, asking about, specifically what kind of um, type of engagement you were looking for from customer service agents, what channels were you using that particular week, what were the questions that you had that particular week. That really fueled a lot more content that both our PR partners could pitch a little bit more actively versus the general passive engagement that we were working with for the week over week insights, but also our marketing partners to create lots of content that they could base off of that as well. In terms of distribution, again, snackable content was really the emphasis here. Our blog, we had bi-weekly articles, which were more about the how-to. The audience for the blog is customers and prospects. So it was, here's the information and here's Salesforce's recommendations on what you can do with that information. Newsroom, again, those sort of key highlights. What does the media care about? Those key takeaways. Amplification of all this content over our various social channels that Salesforce has. And the thing that was really a game changer that I want to really focus on here is Tableau. Tableau, data visualization platform, a Salesforce company, gave us the opportunity to not only feature and demonstrate a use of our product, which we don't typically get to do since we are product agnostic, but also make that data accessible to the audiences themselves versus having a really strict narrative with some predetermined appendix pages that we would put together. So this allowed them to slice and dice the data depending on what was a particular interest to them, and we learned quite a lot. We saw great engagement. So if we go to the next slide, what we had here were just results that really blew us away. Both on our owned channels, without giving away specific numbers and results that we had, we saw our Snapshot Tableau dashboard, which you see in the top left corner there, break our expectations in terms of visitors and engagement by orders of magnitude. We saw general benchmarks for newsroom and blog content be surpassed. And especially on our social channels too, the engagement that we saw on that was really remarkable. And in terms of the earned coverage that we got, it really was quite different than what we had seen from our typical state of projects. For one thing that I really noticed was we saw way more explicit data points in headlines, and they were not, by and large, data points that we had put into our blog and newsroom posts. They were data points that the journalists had actually been going into the Tableau dashboards and extracting themselves based on what they wanted to write about. And sort of an extension of that was just some narratives that they brought out that we would not have really even thought of as a company. So I love this one, why Generation X has lost hope. As a CRM company, that's not something we would necessarily focused on. But that was something that a journalist was able to pull out, something they were interested in, and they wrote an article around it that was really, really interesting. So the moral that I had from this, or the big lesson I had from this, was just making the data accessible is a real big game changer for us. And that was a piece of Jess's project, the Global Stakeholder series that she's going to go into for a bit.
All right. So yes, I will dive into our Global Stakeholder series, which was the second, I would say, new strategy that we implemented during COVID. So to start, I'll give a quick overview and kind of dive into why we made this pivot and why we decided to move forward with this strategy. So overall, our global comms team really wanted to rethink our traditional model of research to, much like Conor said, support a longer-term comms narrative that would help drive awareness of Salesforce through research with our media and around the world. And there were 3 main reasons why. First, we wanted to ensure that we could be relevant in today's ever-changing world. We saw an opportunity to drive thought leadership with new types of topics, higher level topics that were impacting everyone, topics that were big global social issues like the health crisis and the job crisis that we're all seeing and experiencing. Also, we really wanted to understand people's perceptions on the future of work, especially in context to all these big changes that were occurring. Second, we wanted to see how we could drive more global momentum with our stories. At Salesforce, we have amazing PR and comms teams that do an amazing job at launching corporate and product news, but usually the day after we launch, we kind of move on to the next topic. And so we had an opportunity to rethink our model. And so through this research, we really thought through how could we create continued momentum over 5 or 6 months period of time around one key message, and to do this around the world. And then lastly, we wanted to see how we could leverage our own newsroom in a whole new way to really showcase all of this momentum and all of this content. So we decided to build what we call the newsroom landing page or a content hub to bring to life all of this content in one place so that we could have one main CTA, especially as we were driving comms and marketing activities. How can we not only just at one moment launch all of this, but continue to drive engagement to that page through our social channels? So overall, our team came together in a whole new way to try something we'd never done before. And this ultimately was with the goal to see how we could drive awareness with Salesforce through research. So next, I'll cover a little bit more about the details behind the Global Stakeholder Series research and some of our key insights. So to really get a strong point of view on the state of the world and future of work, we decided to survey over 20,000 people globally on a general population audience, and we focused also on 10 countries. And what we found was a few interesting things. First, we found a growing share of people believe that society inequalities should not only be solved by nonprofit organizations and policymakers, rather they believe businesses can also be that platform for change. As you can see here, over 60% of people believe or trust businesses to create a better future for future generations, as well as we found that over 61% of people believe that their employers should give back to their communities. These results tell us that people believe that companies are up to the challenge to addressing key social issues, but there is still room to improve trust, and that's through usually action. We also found there are many ways that companies can be a platform for change, but one of those key stakeholders should be their own employees. We saw that over 65% of people believe that workforce development must be a high priority for businesses over the next 6 months. So companies really need to think about their employees and ways to make it more accessible for them to get the skills that they need now that, especially more than ever, now that we're in this digital work from anywhere world. And lastly, businesses really need to prioritize the health and safety of their employees. We found that over 79% of people believe that businesses should make workplace safety a high priority. So overall, we found that as businesses are preparing for the future, as they are getting ready for our next phase as things enter in recovery, they have an unprecedented opportunity to really make powerful changes that can both elevate their brand, but also help build a better future. So that was a little bit about the actual research and some of the results, but now I'll dive into more about our launch strategy. So when we were first kicking this off, we started with what we want the message to be. And honestly, that was a pretty tough thing for us to figure out. I mean, really, where do you start when you're trying to figure out, or how do you figure out what you want to talk about when you're facing multiple global crises, including a global pandemic? And our approach was really first and foremost, let's talk to other folks. Let's really interview and think about how can we talk to other thought leaders, our PR agencies, to really help us think about what's top of mind, as well as what could be really relevant for our research. From there, that led us to the future of work as our key message. But what we also did was to actually build out 4 sub-themes or sub-pillars within that theme to give us a little bit more flexibility, especially with a very dynamic global landscape. But also it gave our regions, as they were trying to think about what their stories would be, almost a menu of options to pick from so that they could be really relevant in their own regions. Also, from there, we defined our demographics, like I mentioned, 20,000 general population. But we really focused there because we wanted to ensure that we had both a globally powerful and significant sample size, but also one that could be regionally statistically significant, so that the regions could really tell their own local stories with their own local stats. The team also created what we called kind of turnkey and templated assets. This was a combination of bylines as well as graphics, so that we could together consistently tell similar stories, but also with a similar look and feel. And lastly, like Conor had mentioned, Tableau was the foundation of what we did to really be able to visualize our story through data, or visualize our data. And this really helped us tell a stronger story. And it wasn't just externally, but what we found also was really helpful once we put all our data into Tableau. Internally, it really helped us understand where the stories were. We could actually see it and play with it and understand what was going to be really interesting to help us kind of plan for what those storylines that we wanted to present outwards. So dive a little bit more into our tactics. There's kind of 4 core pieces to what we did. First, we partnered very closely with key thought leaders and influencers across Salesforce to create bylines and content. We also worked with them to get placements through publications to really amplify our content globally. We built out that newsroom content hub and partnered that with a great organic and paid social strategy, really ensuring that we had consistent engagement of our content throughout that 6-month period. We also, due to a global landscape that was honestly very different per region, we really felt it was best to empower our regions with with leading them lead their own launch strategies as well as their own launch timing. So if you think about across 3 months, we had different regions activating around the world in different ways so that they could be telling the most relevant story at the most relevant moment. It also gave us an opportunity to try new things across our teams and learn from each other. For example, we had teams that were driving virtual press conferences, others fireside chats, other media roundtables, others were doing podcasts. And so collectively, we were able to experiment and learn and then share those best practices across our groups. And lastly, we saw our regions take a mixed approach of how they actually launched the research. Some launched as a piece of net news, but others focused on more of just leveraging the actual stats to really supplement existing product announcements or exec talk tracks. All right, so now we'll move on to kind of our final part of our presentation where we'll share some of our key takeaways and learnings across all of our research programs. So I'll have Conor jump into some of our key pieces from a research perspective.
Yeah, from a research perspective, and Jess and I have both touched upon this, but making this data interactive and accessible for folks was really, truly a game changer for us. And we're really looking now for opportunities to, if not making it the centerpiece of our projects moving forward, making sure that we do have an element of that looped in. Because again, it really just helps us expand the relevance of it and really overall the consumption of the content. Not any late breaking news to this group here, but speed being so critical to relevance, right? The State Up program is not speedy. We see incredible value of it for its purpose, but understanding when the trade-offs can be made to get speedier insights to market and how to do that without compromising quality was something that we learned as a team that we're going to be definitely putting into practice moving forward. And as Jess mentioned earlier, empowering regional stakeholders to bring it to market in a way that makes sense for them. And I would actually add on to that and say, bringing those stakeholders into the fray at the very beginning of the project, making them have more stake in its success because they contributed to the overall strategy and the overall topics that we were going to cover, rather than it just being something that was handed down from HQ in San Francisco, really helped us broaden the appeal and ultimately the impacts that we saw.
All right, and to quickly go through the rest of these, just to make sure we have hopefully a few minutes for Q&A. Our influencers honestly was a huge success for us and a key learning of how we can leverage our own influencers to get additional amplification and placement. We saw huge jumps in the reach of our research when we were able to partner with other product announcements and initiatives across Salesforce, as well as the leveraging the newsroom was just a great way for us to innovate, as well as a way for us to really create a content hub and landing page from a news perspective that we could drive people to, whether it was journalists as well as from a social perspective. And then internally, we had some interesting lessons learned. And first and foremost, from our perspective, having leadership's backing throughout this was amazing, but also critical. We were trying some big new things that we had never done before. And I think they really did a great job setting us up with, expectations of knowing that this might not work, but we're going to try it and that's okay. And so I think that really empowered the teams to kind of think big, and got us really excited about the programs, knowing that, hey, it's something new, but we'll learn a lot along the way, whether or not it's successful. As well as, like I mentioned, picking the right message is really tricky. And so figuring out the ways that you can really, embrace kind of outside perspectives really helped us move more quickly to get us to kind of that final spot. And then Conor, to kind of wrap us up here.
Yeah, and this was, again, not really a new learning for us, but just something that we had to underscore, which was the alignment between comms and marketing. If they are separate functions in any organization, like they are in Salesforce, much like including our regional stakeholders from the beginning, help them have more skin in the game, and really just help us scale the impact of these efforts way beyond what we would have done on our own.
All right, with that, thank you all so very much, and hopefully we have a few minutes for Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica and Conor, so much. That was fascinating. We may even adopt Tableau ourselves, because I have used your future work, and it is really nice because you can, slice and dice the data and divide. It makes it very easy to digest. So we do have a question, and it's also a question I had from Marilyn Carver. But you created this to showcase Tableau's capabilities, but also the work of what Salesforce is doing. How do you pull this through to connect it to business results?
You want me to take that one, Jess? Sure. So, yeah, this actually wasn't necessarily the goal. It just happened to be a very convenient way for us. We had this technology at our disposal. And again, it was an opportunity to showcase as a secondary benefit the capabilities that we have as a product. But this was actually a first for using Tableau in a comms or marketing function like this. So instead of really pulling it through to core business results, it's been used more as a proof of concept for other teams and for future projects of how this is implemented, and getting some baseline metrics for its performance in terms of engagement that we could hopefully see built upon moving forward.
Yeah, one thing to add, we started to experiment, I think, softly, the idea of linking to additional content within Salesforce too, within Tableau. So it wasn't just here's the research and you're done. How do we continue that content journey, whether it was our website, blog content, other newsroom content. So that's something we're still kind of learning and experimenting with.
And then, so if you're not tying, even for like the comms itself, or looking at that, how are you measuring how many people use? Are you measuring publications in the media? What sort of metrics are you using for success? Even, it's proof of concept, but what are you doing to track this?
Just, do you want to talk about yours?
Yeah, so we honed in on, I would say, 3 to 4 key metrics. First was what we call global stories. So publications, coverage, articles globally. Second was research cycle. How far did the research get used, whether it was in its own kind of standalone article or if it was used in an exec talk track. Third was the newsroom. So having that content hub, that one page, what was the engagement? And then we've been focusing on measuring also the social, since that was something we wanted to see how much that engagement was driving as a big kind of funnel and channel of getting views. How is that performing as well?
Yeah, and in addition to that, we looked at both feature coverage. What were the pieces of coverage that we got that, the research was truly the star, versus what was the one where we had, supporting citations, which, is also really valuable to us. Where can we sort of lend our voice in the thought leadership conversation to boost other narratives? And in addition to that, because we partnered very closely with the marketing organization on this, looking at the what we have a content quality score, on how basically measures how long people stay on page, their click-through rates to other Salesforce content, and looking at how that was benchmarked against others.
Okay, thank you so much, Jessica and Conor. I know you guys had a big announcement yesterday in Dreamforce coming up, so I know you have a lot going on, and we're really happy that you are here. So thank you so much.